Have you ever wondered about the other human stories, the ones that played out long before ours began? For hundreds of thousands of years, the Earth was home to more than one kind of human. Among the most successful, and perhaps the most misunderstood, were the Neanderthals. They were not the brutish, hunched-over cavemen of old cartoons. Instead, they were our sister species, a branch of the human family tree that grew alongside our own for an immense stretch of time. They were intelligent, resourceful, and profoundly adapted to a world that was often cold, harsh, and filled with dangers we can barely imagine today. Their story is a testament to the power of survival. Neanderthals first appeared on the world stage around 400,000 years ago, and for a long time, they were the dominant human species across the vast landscapes of Eurasia. From the rocky shores of Portugal in the west, across the forests and plains of Europe, and deep into the mountains of Central Asia and Siberia, they carved out a life for themselves. They witnessed the slow, grinding advance and retreat of massive ice sheets, adapting to climates that swung from temperate to Arctic. They were here long before the first Homo sapiens ever set foot outside of Africa, and for a time our two peoples even shared the same world, walking the same paths and looking up at the same stars. Their time on Earth finally came to an end around 40,000 years ago, a relatively recent moment in the grand sweep of geological time. Why they vanished while we went on to populate the entire globe is one of the greatest mysteries in human prehistory. Was it a changing climate? Competition with our own ancestors? A combination of many factors? Scientists are still searching for the complete answer. But what we do know is that they did not disappear without a trace. They left behind their bones, their tools, and a legacy that continues to live on within many of us, encoded in the very DNA that makes us who we are today. Understanding the Neanderthals is about more than just looking at fossils. It's about understanding a different way of being human. It challenges our ideas of what it means to be successful, intelligent, and resilient. Their story is not one of failure, but of incredible endurance against overwhelming odds. For more than 350,000 years, they thrived in a world of ice and giants, and in doing so, they became something extraordinary. They became nature's ultimate survivors, and their tale is a crucial chapter in the epic story of humanity's journey through time, a story we are only just beginning to fully appreciate and comprehend. When we picture a human body, we think of our own. But the Neanderthal form was a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering, sculpted by the relentless pressures of a cold and physically demanding world. On average, they were shorter than most modern humans, but what they lacked in height, they more than made up for in sheer bulk. An adult Neanderthal male might stand around 5 feet 5 inches tall, yet weigh close to 185 pounds, most of it solid bone and muscle. They were compact and incredibly powerful, a design that was perfect for conserving heat in frigid climates and for generating the immense force needed for their daily lives. Their skeletons tell a story of incredible robustness. Neanderthal bones were significantly thicker, heavier, and denser than ours. Their rib cages were not shaped like ours, which are narrower at the top. Instead, they were broad and barrel-chested, creating a massive torso that housed enormous lungs. Their shoulders were wide, their arms were powerful, and their kneecaps were huge, all pointing to a life that involved constant, strenuous physical activity. Even their skin, hair, and nails were likely thicker and tougher, a genetic adaptation that provided an extra layer of insulation and protection against the scrapes, cuts, and biting cold of their environment. This stocky, heavy build was a direct response to the Ice Age world they called home. In a cold environment, a compact body with shorter limbs loses heat more slowly than a taller, leaner one. This principle, known as Bergmann's and Allen's rules in biology, is seen in animals all over the world, from polar bears to Arctic foxes. The Neanderthals were a perfect human example of this adaptation. Their entire physiology was a fortress against the cold, a living machine built not for long-distance running across a warm savanna, but for enduring and thriving amidst the snow and ice of ancient Europe and Asia. Every aspect of their anatomy, from their wide pelvis to their thick femurs, speaks of strength and resilience. They were not simply a slightly different version of us. They were a distinct physical model of humanity. Their bodies were the essential tools that allowed them to confront a world filled with colossal beasts and unforgiving weather. This physical foundation made everything else possible. Their hunting strategies, their ability to survive horrific injuries, and their capacity to endure in a land that would have easily defeated a less specialized hominin. Their very bones whisper a tale of power and persistence against the elements. The sheer physical power of a Neanderthal is difficult for us to truly comprehend. While it's impossible to know for sure, scientific analysis of their skeletal structure and muscle attachment points gives us a startling picture. It is widely agreed among researchers that they were significantly stronger than modern humans, possessing a kind of raw, brute force that we have long since lost. Their robust bones were anchors for massive muscle groups, suggesting a body that was in a constant state of readiness, like that of a modern powerlifter or professional wrestler, but developed through the necessities of daily survival, rather than dedicated training in a gym. Based on their physiology, some scientists have made astonishing estimates of their capabilities. An average untrained Neanderthal male may have been able to bench press something in the neighborhood of 500 pounds. Even the females were formidably strong, likely capable of lifting over 350 pounds. This strength wasn't just for show, it was essential. Imagine carrying a 50-pound slab of meat and tools for over 30 miles through rugged, snowy terrain. This was likely a routine task for a Neanderthal hunter returning to their group's camp. Their power was a fundamental part of their toolkit for life, as vital as any stone spear or flint knife. What fueled this incredible strength? It's believed that Neanderthals had naturally higher levels of certain hormones that promote muscle and bone growth, a biological inheritance that gave them a significant advantage in their physically demanding world. Their entire system was geared towards power and explosiveness. This wasn't the lean, wiry strength of a marathon runner, but the dense, powerful build of a sprinter or a wrestler. Every hunt, every journey, every act of shaping a tool required a level of physical exertion that would leave a modern human exhausted in minutes. For them, it was simply life. This strength was most critically applied during the hunt. Unlike early modern humans who developed long-range projectile weapons like spear throwers and much later bows and arrows, Neanderthals were close-quarters hunters. They had to get near massive, dangerous animals and use their immense upper body strength to thrust heavy spears with enough force to penetrate thick hides. This method was incredibly risky, but their powerful build made it possible. Their strength was the difference between a successful hunt that would feed their family for weeks and a fatal encounter with a cornered beast. The fossil record of the Neanderthals tells a brutal but inspiring story. An incredibly high percentage of their skeletons, some studies suggest between 79% and 94%, show signs of healed, traumatic injuries. These were not minor scrapes or bruises. We find evidence of massive blunt force fractures, deep puncture wounds, and even traumatic amputations that the individual somehow survived. This pattern of injury has often been compared to that of modern rodeo riders, people who regularly put themselves in close, violent contact with large, powerful animals. For Neanderthals, this was not a sport, it was the daily business of acquiring food. Many of these injuries were likely sustained during their dangerous close-range hunts. A cornered woolly rhino, a wounded cave bear, or a startled giant deer could inflict devastating damage with a kick, a charge, or a swipe of its claws. One analysis of Neanderthal remains suggested that a huge number of them had survived violent encounters with predators like bears, big cats, and wolves. It seems these were not always cases of the animals hunting the Neanderthals, but rather the animals defending themselves as the Neanderthals tried to hunt them. Every hunt was a life-or-death gamble, and the bones show that Neanderthals often paid a heavy price. What is perhaps most remarkable is not the frequency of these injuries, but the evidence of healing. A Neanderthal with a broken arm, a fractured leg, or a crushed skull could not have survived alone. They would have been unable to hunt, gather food, or defend themselves for weeks or even months. The fact that so many skeletons show extensive healing implies that these individuals were cared for by their social group. They were fed, protected, and nursed back to health. This speaks volumes about their social bonds and their capacity for empathy and compassion, qualities we once thought were unique to our own species. The famous Old Man of Shanidar, an individual found in a cave in modern-day Iraq, is a perfect example. He lived to be around 40 or 50 years old, a great age for that time. Throughout his life, he had suffered numerous crippling injuries. A crushing blow to the head had likely blinded him in one eye and may have damaged his brain. His right arm had withered and was useless, likely amputated above the elbow. He was also arthritic and walked with a limp, yet he lived for years with these disabilities, a clear sign that his clan cared for him, supporting him long after he ceased to be a productive hunter. Their toughness was not just physical, it was social. To power such a strong, muscular body in a cold climate, the Neanderthal engine had to run incredibly hot. Their basal metabolic rate, the amount of energy the body burns just by being alive, was significantly higher than ours. This internal furnace was a crucial adaptation for staying warm, but it came at a cost. It required a tremendous amount of fuel. Scientists estimate that an active Neanderthal may have needed to consume anywhere from 4,500 to as many as 6,700 calories per day to survive. That's comparable to the intake of a modern Tour de France cyclist. But for Neanderthals, this was their daily requirement for life. To process the oxygen needed to fuel this high-octane metabolism, Neanderthals evolved a truly remarkable respiratory system. Their massive barrel-shaped chests were not just for show, they housed lungs with an enormous capacity. On average, their lungs may have been about 20% larger than those of modern humans. One particularly well-preserved specimen, known as Kabara II, is estimated to have had a lung capacity of around 9 liters. To put that in perspective, the average for a modern adult male is about 6 liters. This allowed them to take in huge volumes of air with every breath, supercharging their blood with oxygen. Their noses were another key part of this system. Neanderthal skulls show a very large, wide nasal aperture, suggesting a nose that was much broader and more prominent than ours. This large nose served 2 vital functions. First, it could move air into the lungs much faster, with some estimates suggesting it was twice as efficient as our own at rapid inhalation. Second, and perhaps more importantly in their cold, dry environment, the large internal nasal cavity acted like a radiator and a humidifier. It warmed and moistened the frigid air before it hit their sensitive lungs, preventing damage and making breathing more efficient. This entire system, the high metabolism, the giant lungs, and the specialized nose, was perfectly integrated. It was a biological solution to the problem of being a large, active predator in the Ice Age. It allowed them to generate the explosive power needed for a hunt and to stay warm when the temperature plummeted. However, it also made them slaves to their appetite. A few days of unsuccessful hunting would have been a far greater crisis for a Neanderthal than for a modern human. Their internal engine demanded a constant, massive supply of calories, a relentless pressure that shaped their entire way of life. To fuel their high-energy bodies, Neanderthals became hypercarnivores. Isotopic analysis of their bones, which reveals chemical signatures of the foods they ate, shows that meat made up the vast majority of their diet, at least 70%, and in many cases, much more. While they did eat plants, nuts, and seeds when available, their primary focus was on animal protein and fat. They were the apex predators of their world, targeting a wide range of animals, but they were particularly known for taking on the true giants of the Ice Age, the megafauna that roamed the plains and forests of Eurasia. Their prey included animals that we would consider incredibly dangerous to hunt, even with modern firearms. They pursued wild horses, giant deer, bison, and most impressively, woolly rhinos and even woolly mammoths. These were not small animals. A full-grown woolly mammoth could stand over 11 feet tall and weigh more than 6 tons. Hunting such a creature was an undertaking of immense risk and required incredible coordination, bravery, and strength. A single successful mammoth hunt, however, could provide a colossal amount of food, tons of meat, fat, and organs that could sustain an entire group for weeks or even months. Their hunting strategy was a direct reflection of their physical build-up close and personal. Lacking effective long-range weapons, they relied on ambush tactics and close-quarters combat. They would have used the landscape to their advantage, perhaps driving animals into bogs, box canyons, or against cliffs to trap them. Then, the hunters would have moved in, a terrifying prospect, using heavy, thick-shafted wooden spears tipped with fire-hardened points or sharp stone heads. They didn't throw these spears from a safe distance, they used them as powerful thrusting lances, relying on their immense upper body and core strength to drive the point deep into the animal. This method of hunting explains the high rate of traumatic injury we see in their fossils. It was a brutal and perilous way to make a living. Every hunt was a potential battle. A mistake could mean being trampled, gored, or crushed. Yet, for hundreds of thousands of years, this strategy worked. It allowed them to exploit the richest food source in their environment, the massive herds of large herbivores. Their diet and hunting methods were a perfect, if dangerous, match for their powerful bodies and the challenging world they inhabited, a world where the greatest rewards came only from taking the greatest risks. While their massive lungs might suggest they were phenomenal endurance athletes, the rest of the Neanderthal skeleton tells a different story. They were not built for long-distance running. Unlike early Homo sapiens who evolved in the warm savannas of Africa and developed long legs and springy tendons ideal for chasing prey over vast distances, Neanderthals were built for something else entirely. Their shorter leg bones, wider toes, and the structure of their Achilles tendons were all poorly suited for the mechanics of efficient, long-distance jogging. They were not marathon runners, they were sprinters and power walkers. Their muscles were likely dominated by fast-twitch fibers, the kind that provide short, explosive bursts of power rather than sustained, steady endurance. This muscular composition, combined with their stocky build, made them masters of the ambush. Their entire hunting strategy was likely based on surprise and overwhelming force. They would have used their intelligence and knowledge of the landscape to get as close as possible to their prey without being detected. The final moments of the hunt would not have been a prolonged chase, but a sudden, violent, and powerful charge over a short distance to close the gap and deliver a decisive blow. Think of the difference between a lion and a cheetah. A cheetah uses incredible speed over a moderate distance to run down its prey in the open. A lion, being heavier and more powerful, relies on stealth and a short, explosive burst from cover to ambush its target. The Neanderthal was the lion of the human world. Their physical adaptations were perfectly suited for this style of attack. Their powerful legs could generate immense acceleration, and their strong upper bodies could deliver a devastating impact with a spear at the end of that short, violent sprint. This specialization for ambush hunting fit perfectly within their forested or broken terrain environments. In a dense wood or a rocky valley, long-distance visibility is limited and the ability to run for miles is less useful than the ability to move quietly and explode from cover. Their whole body was a weapon system designed for this specific purpose. Their sharp senses would have helped them detect prey, their intelligence would have allowed them to plan the ambush, and their powerful, sprint-oriented bodies provided the force necessary to make the kill. They were not just strong, they were biomechanically engineered for a life of explosive power. One of the most surprising facts about Neanderthals is the size of their brains. On average, their brain cases were actually larger than those of modern humans, with males averaging around 1,640 cubic centimeters compared to our 1,350. For a long time this was a puzzle. If they had bigger brains, why didn't they outcompete our ancestors? The answer seems to lie not in the size but in the organization and function of the brain. While very intelligent, a significant portion of their larger brain appears to have been dedicated to processing sensory information and controlling their larger, more muscular bodies. A key part of this was their visual system. Neanderthal eye sockets were about 15% larger than ours, suggesting they had enormous eyes. Big eyes are excellent for gathering more light, which would have given them superior vision in the dim, low-light conditions of the European winter during dawn and dusk hunts, or within the shadowy confines of a cave. This enhanced vision, especially their night vision, would have been a major advantage in their world. However, bigger eyes require more brain power to process the extra visual information. A large portion of their brain's posterior region, the occipital lobe, was devoted to this visual processing. While they dedicated more brain volume to vision and body control, this may have left less neural real estate for other functions, such as the complex social networking and abstract symbolic thought that seem to have characterized early Homo sapiens groups. This is not to say they were unintelligent. On the contrary, Neanderthals were highly capable. They crafted sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, planned and executed complex group hunts, likely created simple forms of art and personal adornment, and as we've seen, cared for their sick and injured. Theirs was a different kind of intelligence, one intensely focused on the practical challenges of their immediate environment. Their large brains, coupled with their sharp senses, made them incredibly aware and effective inhabitants of their landscape. They were not philosophers, but they were master naturalists and survivors. They could read the tracks of animals, understand the changing seasons, and navigate complex terrains with an intimacy we have long since lost. Their minds were honed for the here and now, finding the next meal, spotting a hidden predator, and keeping their family safe and warm through another long, dark winter. Their intelligence was a practical, powerful tool for survival in a world that demanded constant vigilance. The story of the Neanderthals does not end 40,000 years ago. Their final chapter is still being written, and the ink is our own DNA. When modern humans expanded out of Africa, they encountered and interacted with the established Neanderthal populations in Europe and Asia. We now know for certain that these encounters sometimes led to interbreeding. As a result, most people of non-African descent today carry a small but significant amount of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, typically between 1 and 2%. This is a direct living link to our ancient cousins, a genetic echo of a time when our two peoples shared the world. For a long time, the effect of this inherited DNA was a mystery. Does it make some people stronger or give them a different physical appearance? The science on this is complex and ongoing, and there is no simple answer. The effects seem to be subtle and are not related to obvious traits like strength or athleticism. Instead, much of the Neanderthal DNA that has persisted in our gene pool seems to relate to our internal systems, particularly our immune system. It's thought that these genes, adapted to Eurasian pathogens, may have given early modern humans a survival advantage as they moved into new lands with new diseases. However, some of this genetic inheritance may be a double-edged sword in our modern world. Certain Neanderthal gene variants have been linked to an increased risk for things like type 2 diabetes, depression, and certain allergies. These traits may have been advantageous in an Ice Age environment but are less suited to our current lifestyles. For example, a gene that helped with rapid blood clotting would have been life-saving for a frequently injured hunter, but today, it might increase the risk of strokes or pulmonary embolisms. We are still grappling with the complex legacy of these ancient genes. Ultimately, the presence of Neanderthal DNA within us is a profound reminder of our shared humanity. They were not a failed experiment or a dead end on the evolutionary tree. They were a successful and resilient people whose journey intertwined with our own. By studying them, we learn not just about a long-lost relative, but about the very nature of human adaptation and survival. They show us that there is more than one way to be human, and that strength can be found not just in bones and muscle, but in compassion, endurance, and the ability to care for one another through the harshest of times. Their legacy challenges us, informs us, and lives on within us.